Anxiety is probably the number one reason that people come in with complaints that are sex related. Anxiety is such a culprit because dysfunction and dissatisfaction are the two big reasons that people come in as umbrella problems for sex therapy. And anxiety is a lot of times behind those because if you think for men, it might be dysfunction, say they're having erectile dysfunction, that type of thing. They get nervous, they have a problem, it doesn't work properly. Then they get so freaked out that it's going to happen again, or they don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're not super experienced, or they have a new partner. Anxiety is the driver that is don't know how to do this, and I'm afraid.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I'm here with Dr. Jenn Kennedy today. She is a clinical sexologist and licensed marriage and family therapist based in Santa Barbara. In her private practice, Dr. Jenn sees couples and individuals in the areas of relationships, sex, addiction, and LGBT. In 2019, she founded her clinical group practice, Riviera Therapy, and under this umbrella, she supervises up-and-coming clinicians. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jenn.
Yeah, good to be here.
Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to go down this career path for yourself?
I actually went back to grad school a little bit later in life. I had two careers first. I was in public relations for a couple years out of undergrad. So I was a public relations major and did some marketing and PR. Then I went back to school and did a degree in photography and worked as a professional photographer for about 12 years. I'd always thought about therapy as a career. It was sort of this like secret thing in the back of my head that I didn't tell anybody. My mom died really suddenly, and I had this whole, oh my God, what am I doing when I was 39? And I just decided this is the thing I want to do. I've got to do it because I don't know how long I'm going to live, and I want to do this. And so I went back to grad school and got my master's at 39, turning 40, and then just kept going as I started working and as I started seeing couples and realizing that sex was something that was missing and that it was a piece that was really important. I then pursued the PhD. My 40s have been a lot about education. I'm now in my 50s, and it has been the best pivot ever. And I will say all the education led to this. And everything, I'm not regretting that I didn't do something sooner. Like it all actually works well together.
I think it's a really brave and a really bold move for you to not only go back to grad school later in life, but also completely change careers. You went from public relationship to photographer and becoming a sex therapist now. And I think that's so amazing. What did it feel like switching from photographer to therapist?
A lot of the photography that I did was editorially based portraiture. It's interesting because in that I was making portraits, most of the time studio based or sometimes environmentally based portraits of people. That includes sitting with people and having a camera that is everyone knows is there. It's not like I was, trailing people or anything like that. It was we were sitting there, we were making a portrait. But that's a lot of body language, that's a lot of eye contact, that's watching the minute movements that they're making and really trying to bring out something in them to make a picture. All those same skills port over into therapy. I am watching somebody and there's a lot of rapport that's happening, but I'm also taking in a lot of that information. It felt like I was sort of doing it anyway, because when I'm trying to make a picture of somebody, I'm trying to help them feel calm and safe and trusting of me. So there's this conversation that's happening at the same time I'm watching them to bring them to a place where I'm going to make a picture that's going to be really amazing, right? It's not just about what they're wearing. It all comes through the eyes. It felt like it was this natural thing that was happening anyway. I was sort of doing a therapeutic thing as a portrait photographer. And now as a therapist, I'm also still not making pictures, but I'm working with narrative and their storytelling in a way that's happening that's different, but still parallels, I would say. Same skills, just different content.
I think somebody who would be thinking about going to grad school also later in life would probably feel that they're behind or that they should have done it earlier. But exactly like you said, it all connects the dots together. I know you were talking about that you mainly specialize as a sex therapist. What brought you down that path and what motivates you to continue working in that area?
I knew going back to grad school, it was to see couples. I have always been fascinated. I did couples therapy as a participant, also as an individual, but I just was really interested in that process. And as I got deeper into it, I recognized that the sex part was sort of underserved, no man's land. And a lot of my peers didn't want anything to do with it. And I was like, ooh, this is an opportunity. First of all, it's an area that there just isn't that much information. In grad school, we get one course in it. And I ended up teaching that course. Since I've graduated, I taught that course for about 5 years at the graduate school level. It's called Human Sexuality. It's just not enough. I was like, ooh, this is really interesting to me. The intimate part, it's not just about sex per se, because sex is never just about sex. It's about intimacy. It's about the back and forth and the subtle communication that happens with, between a couple within that relationship. And then also so much about a relationship to self. It was a way to differentiate myself from all my peers and colleagues, but it was also something that was really fascinating to me. It's been really wonderful. I'm really glad I went that direction.
That's incredible. How can anxiety affect somebody's sex life?
Oh my gosh, anxiety is probably the number one reason that people come in with complaints that are sex related. Anxiety is such a culprit because dysfunction and dissatisfaction are the two big reasons that people come in as umbrella problems for sex therapy. And anxiety is a lot of times behind those, because if you think for men, it might be dysfunction, say they're having erectile dysfunction, that type of thing. They get nervous, they have a problem, it doesn't work properly. Then they get so freaked out that it's going to happen again. So, or they don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're not super experienced, or they have a new partner. Anxiety is the driver that is, don't know how to do this, and I'm afraid to not be stealth or really accomplished or skillful with this partner. Each time it's a perpetuating cycle. Anxiety can be something that will just take them out. That's on the dysfunction. Dissatisfaction, same thing. Like, that's the skillful side. If they don't feel like they know what they're doing and they don't get that feedback loop corrected in terms of having like a really positive experience, they just can psych themselves out. And women do it too. If they're high anxiety, if they tend towards being an anxiously attached person and they want their partner to really love them and they feel like a people pleaser, boy, it can really be challenging in the bedroom. They might totally forgo their own needs. And so it comes in lots of factors. It's the chief problem in sex therapy, anxiety.
How can two people learn to build confidence in the bedroom?
Well, the bedroom is a microcosm of the outside space. It's not like it has its own life. It's just a continuation of what happens between you outside. I would say if there's trust building in the everyday, if you're getting along, if you follow through on commitments, if you are respectful to one another, all that kind of stuff, that carries through in the bedroom, because then you're going to feel like you can ask for things or you can give feedback in the bedroom. And it's not this big gesture or this big foreign sort of dynamic, because it's a more tender space, right? For you to say, I like that, I don't like that. Can you do it this way? Can you touch me this way? Or can I be really verbal or vulnerable or something, right? Where that's a little bit harder. But if you trust this person, or if you've been goofy or awkward or vulnerable in this other context and it's worked out okay, you're likely to be able to do it erotically and have it be okay. So you take small risks in other ways. And when it works out, then you do it in the bedroom and it goes well.
I really like how you said that it doesn't start in the bedroom, it starts on the outside. It starts on how are you guys building your relationship on the outside, and how are you building your relationship with yourself essentially on the outside before getting to that point. So I think that's a really great way to put it. How can two people communicate what their wants and their needs are?
What a fun dinner conversation. When you're not actually having sex, but you're just talking about it in theory. Like, oh, that could be like a really charged conversation that might be really fun to have. I would challenge them to do that, or do it on a road trip when you're not actually having to look at each other. Just like take turns, like talking side by side when you're driving or something. Like, what would be a really fun thing that you would imagine doing sexually? I mean, it's like if you can't talk about it, then should you be doing it? Talking about it also starts to build some anticipation. It starts to take some of the fear out of it. All of it's just body to body. It's all okay. It's all allowed. But I think asking for it verbally starts to, first of all, signal to your partner that you want it and bring down some of that fear and trepidation. You can also just non-verbally signal it in the bedroom, but I just think that that's rife with confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what you were saying, over a dinner conversation or a road trip, because then you're able to have more fun with it and you're doing something. So it's not like you're just like sitting there
Mhm.
having that conversation, like you're engaging the conversation while doing an activity. So I think that's actually really fun and that's really cool.
If somebody opened up a dinner conversation where you're in a good mood and you're getting along and you're like, you know what would turn me on so much is if we did X. And you're just like, huh. Like you're not actually asking to do X in that moment. You're just listening to them tell you why it would turn you on so much or turn them on. That's a fun, playful exchange. I would love to have that conversation
Yeah.
as a theoretical exercise, you know?
What's the difference between sexuality and sensuality?
Well, I feel like there's this conflation that everything is sex. And, there's sensuality and intimacy as also another word that gets kind of thrown in there that all get conflated into sex. And then sex gets all conflated into penetrative sex. Sensuality to me is sort of a broadened version of your senses being brought in, right? It's things that just generally more widely turn you on. So I do this whole exercise with my couples, and I do it in the course that I teach too, where it's looking at what primes you for intimacy. And that might be, for some people, they're more sensitive. So it might be scent, it might be touch, it might be taste. There's some people that they love sight, they love design, they love music. They're just like, ooh, they can be turned on by a lot of things, or they're primed to be in a receptive place, right? And so sensuality, they like touch, not necessarily genital touch. They like erotic touch. It might be going to get a massage. It might be taking a really hot shower. Oh, it might be stretching. All of that can be very sensual too. It might be pressure, certain types like acupressure or a scalp massage, those kinds of things can feel very sensual without having anything to do with genitals. And so if you have a broader language for some of that, it can really make the whole experience so much more delicious. If you're open to it, it can elongate and really just make it more interesting. And I find that couples that are in longer term relationships really enjoy that type of interplay instead of it just being like, bam, orgasm, go, done, you know?
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that it's really good for people who are in longer term relationships as well, because you want to keep it interesting and you want to keep it fun and not just get into the habit of going through the motions and doing the same thing over and over. So that leads me to my next question is how can a couple introduce sex toys into their relationship?
I always find this interesting that in heterosexual couples, sometimes men can be kind of funny about this. They can feel a little bit challenged, or they can get a little jealous or worried that they're going to be replaced. Do not worry, I will say, because this can be actually a very positive thing for you. It can be an enhancer, right? Because a lot of times women are not getting an orgasm from penetration. And so some vibration, some sort of toys can be really helpful. And having toys can be fun. The novelty of that for both parties can be really positive. There's internal toys, there's external toys, but oftentimes you're getting more clitoral stimulation for her, which means everybody wins, right? Because then she gets that. Toys can also be like handcuffs or nipple clamps or blindfolds, right? There's lots of toys in that whole realm that can be really enhancing of the senses and just sort of make the whole thing fun and pleasing and not just standard, where one person is expected to do all the work. And I think that's a really positive thing for everybody involved. Oftentimes, one person kind of gets the responsibility of initiation and carry through, and it could be either party, but it's that tends to start to feel like a lot of pressure. And so the toys can be a third thing that relieves some of that pressure, and it becomes this fun thing that you can anticipate. And there's things that, can be used partially during play or throughout play or that can be partner play. So there's lots of variables. But I love toys. I think they're a great solution for couples.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you explain what the importance of foreplay is and why couples should take it more serious?
Yeah, foreplay is super important because especially for women, it's like the whole narrative before the arc of orgasm. Women oftentimes don't have sort of one and the same with desire and arousal. Arousal being the physiological response of the body, desire being like, I want this. And so men can sometimes have one and the same, right? They have a thought of wanting and their body is like, I'm here. Women don't necessarily have that. With understanding that whole foreplay, trickling that out, and foreplay isn't necessarily just the 10 minutes before orgasm. Foreplay can start the day before. Foreplay can start the morning of. Foreplay is the banter. Foreplay is the lingerie you put on the morning of. It's the notes you leave for each other. It's the flirty texts. It could be the glances at dinner. It could be anything, right? Foreplay is all of it. And it helps the mind sort of get on board and start to anticipate this is fun. This is something that I want. And usually both parties kind of like the foreplay because it's part of the dance that you're doing. But women in particular kind of need that. So, in terms of actual orgasm lead up time, typically women need about 14 to 17 minutes of dedicated time before orgasm to have that dedicated time of foreplay to reach orgasm because they're not going to just with partner play. Now, but by themselves, women can get to an orgasm in about 2 minutes. But with a partner, they need like that 15 minutes of interaction. It's not funny.
I would never do it.
Solo, it's like no problem. But with a partner, you need a little warm up. Yeah.
I would never guess. That's such a mind-blowing statistic. Wow.
Foreplay and lube are your best friends.
What are the different types of orgasms a woman can have?
Well, okay, so technically orgasms are orgasms. It's a whole bunch of your different parts are spasming at once. So technically you can have an orgasm through different types of stimulation, but technically your organs are all spasming together. So an orgasm is your pelvic floor, your anus, all of it is like spasming at once. And it's involuntary and it feels really good. But you can have an orgasm from anal penetration, you can have it from vaginal penetration, you can have it from clitoral stimulation, you can have it with nothing being touched from just here. And like some women can have it from just squeezing. You can have it from lots of different avenues. But when you have it, all of those things are spasming. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I got a little technical, but yeah, there's lots of avenues in, but the end result is the same. They are all just having a big old muscle spasm that feels.
Yeah, that's all such really great information and such great advice. Can you describe how pillow talk helps build intimacy?
Pillow talk is kind of the chat and interaction that happens after sex typically. Oftentimes you're flooded with hormones that feel really good. And for women who have usually anxious attachment or secure attachment, they're really loving that time. They want that interaction. They want the gazing. They want the quality connection with partner. The avoidant folks, not so much. They might be up and out, male or female. They're like, okay, that was fun. I had my release. Goodbye. But for the most part, pillow talk is welcome from the other two types of people. It's a time when defenses are down. The body tends to be in a relaxed state. There's a softening of boundaries. There's a softening of self. And it feels almost like a merger a little bit. And there's just a closeness and it feels pretty welcome for most people. There's just like a bonding that's happening. Oxytocin is just like, yay, bonding time. Yeah.
Something you mentioned is that most people want that pillow talk after intimacy, except the avoidant type. What makes a person avoidant and to not want that pillow talk?
That's an attachment style, which is typically a function of early caregiving. You can there's attachment quizzes all over the internet. I actually have one on my website too that you can find. And that is usually determined by early caregiving, by like the first couple of years. And it's how your parents, usually it doesn't have to be, but your caregivers interacted with you. And it's a temperament that kind of gets developed over time, and it can change. If you're in relationship with healthier people, you can move more towards secure attachment. But the insecure attachment types tend to develop as a result of parenting that was inconsistent or unavailable. So there's anxious, there's avoidant, there's dismissive, there's different types. And the more avoidant types are a result of parents that weren't terribly available or weren't very kind.
How can somebody work on their attachment style if they are an avoidant and solely just want the intimacy and nothing else after? How can somebody work on being more open with that?
I've actually done a couple videos on this. It's a slower process, but it's consistency. So if you're in relationship with somebody who is more secure and they consistently show up for you, they follow through, they're good communicators, they're loving towards you, and you start to build trust and you start to believe, oh, this is a different reparative experience, you can move closer to secure. When your needs get met, when you start to realize you have needs, you ask for them, they get met, it feels really good, you start to get more secure, right? Because that didn't happen in childhood. Your needs were not met. And so you started to not want needs, right? You stopped having them, but you wouldn't let yourself kind of have them or express them. But when you start to be in relationship with people who do demonstrate that in a healthy way and do meet yours in a healthy, consistent way, we see this with pets. I got this cat from a shelter that was totally a scaredy cat, wouldn't trust anybody, wouldn't get on my bed for 3 years. Now she sleeps next to my head. But it took 3 years for her to even get on the bed, right? That is an avoidant attachment that has moved towards secure. It just took a long time of really consistent, loving, trusting, giving. It's the same with humans. It just takes time, consistency, and trust building.
Wow. It's a great example of what you just said with your cat because it's doable and it's something that's not impossible to become secure, but it takes time. Whether it's an animal or a human, it still takes time because there's still trauma to some sort. Even though animals can't talk, you can tell that if you get a dog or a cat from the shelter and they're scared or they're reactive to loud noises, it's because they also have trauma that we just don't know about. And that also goes with humans as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're adaptive. And so there's this conditioning. If we have a tough situation or a painful moment, we don't want it to reoccur. And so if we approach things that even seem similar, we're like, nope, I'm not going to do it again until we have a reparative situation. And then we get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. But there's evidence, I see it with my cat and I've seen it with humans, that we start to trust again and eventually love again and allow love and allow closeness. It just takes forever. It takes a long time.
For somebody who has trauma that is from intimacy, from previous relationships, or has had their heart broken, how do you encourage that person or a couple to build that trust again with intimacy in relationships?
Communication is going to be super important, and probably sometimes making things explicit. So not assuming that the other person just understands what you're saying or doing, like what you mean, but instead saying, this is what I need, or that felt really good, or I love you being here with me, or you're the one that I want. Literally, it's making things a little bit more direct or explicit out loud so that they understand. There isn't a lot of like confusion about why are you here or what are we in this for. Sometimes for avoid or specifically, there's kind of a more extreme avoidant version, dismissive. Things can feel transactional for those folks. Sex, again, might also feel transactional. They want to get off, but they don't want to risk their emotional needs for the long term. So they're not going to stick around and cuddle. But on some deeper level, they do want that. They just don't trust it. Having over time building some degree of maybe hanging out without the intimacy, or saying, hey, it would be really nice if maybe sometime you'd sleep over and we don't have to stay in the same bed. You could stay on the couch or something like that, right? Where there's some permission giving for like, I'd like to have you here in the morning and it'd be nice to have breakfast afterwards and not have you jet right after or something like that. Like, I want you here. I do care for you, but I also want to respect that you need some distance. That's, I see you and I respect you and I also want some more of you. So it's a little bit of negotiation of relationship and signaling that I care about you, which is scary to somebody who is like, avoidant.
It's amazing how far communication can take you. It's by saying those simple sentences that seem simple, but they may be hard to say in the beginning. Like, I enjoy being with you, or I like the way that we spend time in this way. And they're simple, but they can take you such a long way and also help clarify a lot of confusion on both ends. I think we live in such a situationship kind of world that people are afraid of putting in that commitment. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that those, they seem simple, and yet when you hear them on the receiving end, if you're not used to hearing affirming statements like that, it means a lot, right? When somebody says, I really enjoy your company, or I'm my best self with you. Oh my God, that's so nice, right? That's such a meaningful statement to hear, to be on the receiving end of, or you make me feel incredibly good when we have sex, right? To take it into the sexual realm. Or I've been thinking about you all day and I can't wait to be with you. That's a physical part, but then it's like the emotional part is a whole nother piece of it. So I think being able to verbalize some of this stuff and have the person not completely melt down and disappear is a risk. And they might. And then you might have to circle back and take it down a notch. But being willing to unpack that and have that conversation, that's intimacy building. And that might be very new for both of you. So taking some relational risks and being able to talk about that stuff. And maybe you need to go to therapy. Maybe you need a couples therapist to help you do it in a more neutralized way. But I would say having those conversations is where you move the ball forward.
That's so beautiful. How can vulnerability increase pleasure in a relationship?
I will admit that I think you can have great sex with someone you don't know very well, because there's just all that charge and there's all that projection of like, ooh, this person's hot. So yes, that is possible. However, it's a whole different level when you know someone really well and you can be vulnerable, really vulnerable, right? Vulnerable sex is a whole different level of dropping in and saying, this is who I am. You know me, you know my weaknesses, you know the things that scare me, you know, the things that my pluses and minuses and all of it, and you still love me. That's amazing. And I'm going to be vulnerable with you. And I'm not going to be performative, because I think early sex can oftentimes be performative, where you're like, I'm just going to look really hot and make you like me while we're having sex, especially for women. But men too, you know, both can kind of be performing a little bit. Whereas vulnerable sex it can look a little more animalistic, kind of like, you know, you can get a little more raw, like there's moaning and there's messiness and there's just, you're just more in your natural self. And it's really amazing, and it's unguarded, and it just feels so satisfying. So I think that you have to have a certain amount of confidence and you have to have a certain amount of trust, but it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding. It's
That's
different.
incredible. When you work with couples, or from personal experience, how long does it usually take the couple to build that kind of vulnerability to get to that level?
Oh gosh, it so depends. It depends on how guarded they are when they come in. You know, it's like, it's their family of origin, you know, like it's their religion, it's their body image. Oh, there's just a million factors. Some people come in and they're in a place where they're just really open and curious and they're just ready, and it takes them maybe 6 sessions. Other people are just weighted down with a whole bunch of like history. They've got trauma, maybe sexual trauma. Religion is like a big one, actually. I work with a lot of people that have religious trauma where they just feel like they don't deserve pleasure, women in particular. There's been a lot of messages around modesty or around premarital sex is bad, and then they get married and they still feel a lot of guilt around sex, and sex is only for procreation. And so there's just a lot of like shoulds. It depends on what you're bringing in and how attached you are to that. And can you let go of it? I have to like help them unpack this big backpack that they've been loading stuff up for a million years. And what are we looking at here? What do we need to tease apart? What serves you now and what is true for you? It's an expedition, really, and it takes what it takes. Some couples I've seen for years, some couples I see for a couple months. It really depends.
I love how you've made this your mission, because as someone like myself who was naive once upon a time, I knew absolutely nothing about sex and intimacy. And I think you're really filling a gap in this world. And it's such an incredible thing to do.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's interesting work. No two people are the same, but I definitely see patterns. It's nice to be able to help. And that's why groups are helpful too, because the participants can cross-pollinate. They can talk about their situations and people can see it in each other, and they can kind of expedite healing for one another.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been so wonderful, Dr. Jenn. Before we go ahead and wrap things up, is there any last piece of advice that you'd love to leave the audience with?
I would say that just recognize that you deserve pleasure, and pleasure throughout your entire life cycle. I have clients right now who are coming to me for sex therapy that are in their 80s, the whole life cycle. And sex looks different at different ages, and it's not always the goal of frequency, right? It changes, the definition and the outcome changes, but that your connection to self and to body should be there, and you deserve that.
So can you please tell us, where can people support you and where can they find you?
Definitely. So pleasureproject.us is where all my sex stuff happens. So you can find my podcast there. It's also on Spotify and Apple. So that's called Pleasure Project, Sex and Relationships. You can just go to pleasureproject.us and find all of my stuff there. Sign up for my newsletter, find my podcast and all that good stuff. And then my therapy side of things, if you're in California, is Riviera Therapy.
I'll have all of that linked down in the show notes below so people can stay in touch. Thank you, Dr. Jenn.
Great. You're welcome.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I'm so thankful that you're here. Your support means so much, and I'm so excited to bring to you our very first Nourished Inside Out live virtual summit on April 26th and 27th. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, and pre-sale for tickets will be for a limited time. You can find the link in the show notes below for more information. See you there, and as always, keep growing and thriving.